Welcome to the fourth presentation in the PowerPoints to Ponder series, this one being about assessment. My name is Bruce McMullen, and please remember, if at any stage you wish to pause this presentation and record any notes, please feel free to do so. I would like to help you understand assessment as a multifaceted tool. Its types, its uses, and tips on considering what the data gleaned from the application of assessment strategies will tell you. You know, the feedback that you can get. And even how this new understanding of assessment that I hope you'll get can be applied to your assignments, particularly assignment 2. We all have a conceptual understanding of the term assessment, and it can vary from tests like topic tests or NAPLAN or ELA or HSC or any other form of examination to doing your tax. You get your tax assessed, or even assessing your health. You will assess the progress of your students, and your supervisors will assess your progress and efficiency. And as a teacher, assessment is fundamental to almost everything you do, and vital as a component of the learning process, because it provides a mechanism to inform the learning process. It provides feedback on your teaching strategies and activities. In red, measuring the success or otherwise of the teaching activities, this is where you do summative assessment. This is where you give a mark or a grade, because this is what reflects the achievement of the outcomes, both of the syllabus and of the lesson. Let's look at a definition of assessment. According to the New South Wales Department of Education, it may be defined as the process of identifying, gathering and interpreting information about students' learning. They go on to define the central process as providing information on student achievement and progress, notice that's in red, and setting the direction for ongoing learning, notice that's in green, and teaching in orange. So let's consider types of assessment. Then the red, green and orange will become obvious. You have a responsibility to assess the progression of learning of your students, and many education authorities have provided a plethora, lots and lots of support materials to assist in this process. I did a Google search and got about 1.5 million links to formative assessment, 2.5 million links to summative assessment, and 4.5 million links to diagnostic assessment when I put those in as the key words. Now, the one that isn't there is diagnostic assessment. So we need to consider that formative assessment is assessment for learning, summative assessment is assessment of learning, and a great deal about those can be had from that website listed below. But then again, we do, as I mentioned, have diagnostic assessment. And that is the one that you use in the classroom for a variety of things. It can assess prior knowledge so that you can then apply constructivist principles and build on it. It'll assess a particular strategy. You know, does it work? Has it increased the ability of the student to demonstrate the achievement of the outcomes? You can do the same with a resource. So why do we assess? First of all, as is most obvious, it's a requirement of your job. And once again, the website there provides you with a great deal of information as defined by the Board of Studies if you're in New South Wales, which has now got a different name. But assessment is not something to be avoided. It's important because we are identifying where learners are currently placed in their learning. Now this can be summative or diagnostic or formative or a combination of them. We're also looking at the gaps between learning and the deficiencies identified by some of these formative assessment tasks. And we also find out about an individual's, or a group for that matter, current level of attainment based on evidence. And that's where you get summative and diagnostic types of assessment strategies. So let me explain that to you a little better. First of all, there's three main components to assessment. It's a process designed to demonstrate achievement. So we must identify what sort of information will prove that achievement. And that's where we use tests and quizzes and collect work samples and make observations. We gather information in the process and then we interpret that information to reveal the proof of the achievement. So what does the information tell you about what the learner can or cannot do? If they can't do something you're asking them to, then you're going to have to adjust your teaching strategies. At the end of the lesson or the sequence, has the learner got it, so to speak? If not, then perhaps you're going to need to provide additional experiences to bring that learner to a level where they can demonstrate successful achievement of the outcomes. And the other component is, how can I teach it better? This is where you evaluate the lesson. Personal reflection or peer provision of feedback. But I stress that box on the green. Each assessment task has to be meaningful. In other words, it has a use. Don't do a test for the sake of terrorizing the kids. So let us first have a look at diagnostic assessment. It implies that you're looking to find out about and establish the nature of something specific. For diagnostic assessment, marks are generally not recorded. For example, your science knowledge audit has told you where gaps are in your desired level of knowledge. Now it's up to you to fill in those gaps. So you can see it can be used to diagnose strengths and areas of need in all students. So we have before and after testing as an example of diagnostic assessment. If we get a mark before and then give the same test after and there's no improvement, well, then we know we have problems. But you can also do quizzes and surveys, look at diagrams and drawings and KWL charts to determine prior knowledge. So diagnostic assessment is an essential device for teachers because it does identify strengths of learners, and you can draw on those in a group situation. And it also identifies places where teachers can plan the strategies that they intend to use. Now, before we talk about formative assessment, because you all know what it is, let's look at some examples. First of all, the kids can draw a concept map in class to represent their understanding of a topic. And in so doing, you can identify individual knowledge by looking at their responses or lack thereof. You can look for misconceptions in individuals or as the group or as the whole class. And you're encouraging peer comment and discussion. You're not just telling, you're listening. You can get them to construct a word wall. And in that, you're seeking meanings from the individual for words that they identify. And you're looking to see how that word is relevant to a particular concept or event or observation or discovery. You can ask students to submit 1 or 2 sentences identifying the main point of a book passage, for example, as a preliminary to your lesson or as a follow-up for an extension type activity. These identify if the learner has got the point, and that also points to the depth of their understanding. You can discuss And in that, you're considering prior knowledge and and you're identifying ways that the learner is able to create links, both across KLAs and across different concepts. And of course, there are many others. Again, a simple search of the web will yield lots of hits for you. So let's be a bit more specific about formative assessment. It is assessment for learning, and it occurs during the lessons. You're looking for information that you can collect during the lesson. So what's it do? It provides ongoing feedback for you to help you improve your teaching. And it also helps the learner to improve their learning. And you're encouraging an environment where the learner is or should feel free to say, I'm sorry, Fred Nurk, Mr. Nurk, I don't get it. Then it's up to you to provide a different strategy. So in saying that, helping students identify their strengths and weaknesses, they can identify their weaknesses and target ways that they can get over it, where and how they can seek help. So it's also helping the teacher recognise where students are struggling, and then they can provide additional strategies or guide the design of strategies to address any problems that they see. Another valuable component of formative assessment is that it facilitates learner reflection on the success or otherwise of the teaching strategies employed. You're asking learners to evaluate your strategies every time you walk into the classroom. They often don't give you the feedback, but they are actually doing it. We don't get marks for our teaching, but we give marks for students' learning. And summative assessments are assessments of learning. They're quantifiable and they're measurable. These are the ones that cause most stress because it compares. It leads to self issues. What does coming first mean, and what does it do to the person who comes last? What does top of the class mean? What's bottom of the class? Were you ever at the bottom of the class? If you were, how did you feel? Summative assessments need to be treated with care to avoid such comparisons being made. So they evaluate and measure student learning, and they usually happen at the end of a lesson. And as I said, it compares against a standard, and that's called standard referencing assessment, where you demonstrate a level of competency. Most of you have your licenses, and as a consequence you had to do a driving test to demonstrate your competency. It can also compare it to a benchmark, and this is norm referencing. The HSC, ELA, NAPLAN are all examples of norm reference tests, and often they're defined, the marking of them is defined by a rubric. A bit more about that in a moment. So a mark or grade is awarded, and here's some other examples: the half-yearly exam, a final project, a composition, all sorts of things. As much as summative assessments carry fear with them, they are an important requirement of every single teacher's bag of tricks, because parents and often schools like to be told where Freddie is coming in the class, and promotes that level of competitiveness. Now, I mentioned a rubric. Here is an example with which you should be familiar. They are a valuable tool in the marking process, and we apply this rubric to marking certain assignments. For example, you'll note in there it says correct punctuation, spelling and grammar. If you have perfect punctuation, spelling and grammar, you'll get across in this box. 1 or 2 errors, this box. Half a dozen, this box. More than that, well. So, rubrics, as I've said, are a very, very valuable thing. Once they're prepared, they provide a scaffold to allocate marks and grades and make the marking so much easier. So a little bit of time spent before you start the marking saves you an awful lot of time during the course of same. Now perhaps you might like to pause this presentation at this stage and record those websites, because they have a huge amount of information and provide links to other websites which will give you examples of how to construct rubrics and even examples of particular rubrics that you can apply in your classroom. So how is this relevant to your assignments? All right. You're looking to demonstrate you have a knowledge of formative assessment. So the tip is identify the strategies you've used to determine prior knowledge. I'm not going to go into more detail, obviously. Secondly, one of the assignment criteria asks you to make links between syllabus outcomes and lesson outcomes and assessment strategies. The assessment strategies might be summative, but you are in a process of linking them all together to make them work. We're also seeking your ability to put an opportunity to reflect on the success or otherwise of the lesson, and this would demonstrate your knowledge of diagnostic assessment strategies. So when we look at it, in assignment 1, as part of your lesson plan, you are to design and use a reader as a resource. And it says, I quote, an assessment activity that allows you as the teacher to determine if the students have achieved the lesson outcomes. Obviously you must start with a syllabus outcome, and obviously you must link your assessment activity to both of those. In assignment 2, as part of your 5E sequence, you are to identify your strategies to assess the achievement of outcomes. That's written in there. And also as part of assignment 2, you are to provide evidence for coherent, appropriate and justified assessment strategies are apparent. Make sure that the assessment is appropriate and addresses the targeted outcomes. I hope this little bit helps. I hope it'll once again move you from a D to an HD, and I once again seek your feedback. Now, teaching isn't always doom and gloom and hard work. You will be tempted on occasions to collect samples of students' work. Here are some. You may wish to pause it to read it, and there is another page after that. And the next page. And that's it for this PowerPoint. Perhaps